Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Optional prayer or invocation by Mrs. Shaw, Councilwoman Shaw.
So I pray for the help and the guidance that we need in all that we do. Thank you.
Roll call, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Anderson,
Here.
Mrs. Clear,
Here.
Mr. Rastatter,
Here.
Mrs. Rennie,
Here.
Mrs. Showerman,
Here.
Mr. Schenk,
Here.
Chairman Horton.
Here. This part of the agenda we have hearing for the public. If anyone called in, and I don't see that anyone did, but were someone to call in, they would be allotted 5 minutes. And if someone just showed up at our meeting and wanted to share, they would be allotted 3 minutes. Seeing that, is there anyone from the public who wish to be heard? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for the acceptance of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Rathstetter and Councilwoman Rennie. Was that you?
Yes.
Yeah. Question?
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastatter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Reports from county officials. Is there anyone from the county executive or her designee that wishes to be heard?
None tonight, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee met on January 16th. Today, we will be looking at on the new business, letters A through F, and the possible sale of parcels S through V. This concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman Clear. Personnel Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Personnel Committee met on Thursday, January 16th. We are presenting items G through R for Council's agenda this evening, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Are there any other reports from Council?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I joined together with my fellow colleagues and am honored that we've put forth the names of several people that we've lost since our last meeting. These are people that have touched the lives of council members, all residents of Erie County, people associated with county government, and we honor them with a citation that we'll send to the family. We're not going to read those citations tonight, but I would like to ask that we add to our minutes the citations that we've presented and signed, and those are for Mrs. Bonnie Lee Jorgensen Tullio, Mr. Jerry Haggerty, Mrs. Ruth Misfit Moore, and former City Controller and School Board Director, Mrs. Brenda Punt. All of them were dedicated to our community, to their families, and to the service of this area in which we love, and all of Erie County honors them. And I thank all of the council for joining me in citation for them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Anderson. There being no old business, we'll move right to new business. We have first reading of ordinance number 1, 2020. Smith, title only.
A first reading of ordinance number 1, 2020, first 2020 Planning Fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $150,000 for match funding from Act 101 Trust Fund.
First reading of ordinance number 2 of 2020.
A first reading of ordinance number 2, 2020. First 2020 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $34,750 for purchase of a vehicle for the district attorney's office.
Item C, first reading of ordinance number 3 of 2020.
A first reading of ordinance number 3, 2020. Second 2020 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $100,000 for County Day Reporting Center startup funds.
Resolution number 1 of 2020.
Resolution number 1, 2020, a resolution approving a revision to Erie County's fiscal year 2017 Community Development Block Grant Program.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Anderson, Councilwoman Clear. Any discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Resolution number 2 of 2020.
Resolution number 2, 2020, approval of amendments to pilot agreement between St. Vincent Health Center, the City of Erie, the City of Erie School District, and the County of Erie.
So moved.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Anderson, Councilwoman Rennie. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I just want to mention on this particular resolution, because the question did come up as to what is it that we were doing here with St. Vincent. And St. Vincent has been under a pilot agreement with the City of Erie and the school district, and then the County of Erie. There have been, over time, some minor changes with the movement of office building space. Those that were nonprofit and were for-profit, some of those dimensions had changed. And so to keep this up to date, St. Vincent went back through with the City of Erie and the school district and made sure that, that all of those were amended. Now they come to Erie County for that, and we thank our solicitor, Tom Tallarico, who has gone through that process and has moved this forward to us for approval, seeing that everything is properly in place. And so I will be supporting this tonight, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Anderson. Roll call, please.
On Resolution 2, Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Resolution number 3 of 2020.
Resolution number 3, 2020, approving the 2020 solicitor contract for the office of the Erie County Coroner.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Anderson, Councilwoman Showerman. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On Resolution 3, Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Now, this is the part, that was resolution number 3. Now, this is the part where the constitutional stuff really going to be a little longer with all these appointments. But I don't want you to think that this is the norm. We're entering into a new year. We just reorganized, so appointments are forthcoming. But generally, you won't have all of these in one. But we would like to read them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item G is the possible reappointment of William Conway to the Library Advisory Board for a term ending December 31, 2022. This is an appointment of Mr. Anderson.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion. Roll call.
On the Conway appointment, Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item H on the agenda is the possible reappointment of Earl Brown to the Erie County Agricultural Land Preservation Board for a term ending December 31, 2022. This is an appointment of the county executive.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Councilpersons Anderson and Clear. Roll call.
On the appointment of Mr. Brown, Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item I is the possible reappointment of Brian Wasorick to the Erie County Drug and Alcohol Advisory Board for a term ending December 31, 2022. This is an appointment of the county executive.
So moved.
Seconded.
Been properly moved and seconded by Councilpersons Anderson and Showerman. Roll call.
On the appointment of Mr. Wasorick, Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item J is the possible reappointment of Liz Allen to the Erie County Library Board for a term ending December 31, 2022. This is a appointment of the county executive.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilpersons Anderson and Rennie. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
On the appointment of Ms. Allen, Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item K is the possible reappointment of Robert Guthrie to the Erie County General Authority, Community Services Financing Authority, for a 5-year term expiring December 31, 2024. This is an appointment of the county executive.
So moved.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by Councilpersons Anderson and Rennie. Roll call.
On the appointment of Mr. Guthrie, Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item L is the possible reappointment of Mary Hoffman to the Erie County MHID Board. This is a second 3-year term expiring December 31, 2022, appointment by the county executive.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by Councilpersons Anderson and Rennie. Roll call.
On the appointment of Ms. Hoffman, Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item M is the possible reappointment of Dr. Cynthia Weibel to the Erie County MHID Board for a 3-year term expiring December 31, 2022. This is also appointment of the county executive.
So moved.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by Councilpersons Anderson and Shank. Roll call, please.
On the appointment of Dr. Weibel, Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item N is the possible reappointment of Bishop Clifton McNair III to the Erie County Board of Health for a 4-year term ending December 31, 2023. This is an appointment of the county executive.
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Anderson and Rastetter. Roll call, please.
On the appointment of Bishop McNair, Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item O is the possible reappointment of Mary Jean Taylor, Ph.D., to the Erie County Board of Health for a term expiring December 31, 2023. This is also an appointment of the county executive.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Anderson and Clear. Roll call.
On the appointment of Dr. Taylor, Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Chairman Horton. I'm sorry, Chairman Horton?
Yes.
Thank you. Item P is the reappointment of Harry Emy to the Erie County Redevelopment Authority for a term ending December 31, 2024. This is an appointment of the county executive.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Anderson and Schenk. Roll call, please.
On the appointment of Mr. Emy, Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Item R is the possible appointment of,
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. You skipped Q.
oh, I beg your pardon.
I'm sorry,
The
Mr.
next
Clerk.
item is item Q, the reappointment of Dale Barney to the Erie County Gaming Revenue Authority for a term ending December 31, 2024. This is an appointment of Chairman Horton.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Anderson and Schenk. Roll call, please.
On the appointment of Mr. Barney, Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Now, item R is the appointment of James DeHaven to the Library Advisory Board for a term ending December 31, 2022. This is an appointment of Councilperson Sharman.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Showerman and Rattstaff. Roll call, please.
On the appointment of Mr. DeHaven, Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Mr. Schenk,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Would you like me to go to the next item, Mr. Chairman, or did you want to handle those?
Oh, I'll take those.
Thank you.
Item S. I'll read these through and then, we'll vote on them as they come up. I kind of like doing it this way, too. Possible sale of parcel from the repository. And let me just say this, to the new members. When we get to the repository sales, they've already been, dealt with at the city and the school district level, the other two taxing bodies. They really just fulfilled that promise. But Possible sale of a parcel from the repository for unsale property at index number 18052036.0611. That's Kathleen Bash and Quentin Leo Ishman offered $250 for the parcel located at 4007 Conrad Road in the city of Erie.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Roll call.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Item T, possible sale of parcel from the repository. Mr. Craig M. Ellis Jr. offers $250 for the parcel at 1228 Buffalo Road, Erie, Pennsylvania.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Anderson and Clear. Roll call, please.
On item T, Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Item U, possible sale of a parcel from the repository. Ms. Stephanie Siner offered $250 for the parcel located at 639 East 7th Street, Erie, Pennsylvania.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Anderson and Clear. Roll call, please.
On item V, Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just for clarification, that was item U.
oh, I beg your pardon.
That's okay.
Thank you. Good catch. Item V, possible sale of a parcel from repository. Mr. Bob Pullett offers $250 for the parcel located at 6621 West Ridge Road, Lot 16, Fairview Township.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Anderson and Councilwoman Rennie. Roll call, please.
On item V, Mrs. Clear,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mrs. Rennie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sharman,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. I entertain a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chairman, before we adjourn, I'd like to just formally welcome all of the new members to council and commend you on the work that you've done thus far, particularly Councilwoman Clear, Chair of Finance, and Councilwoman Rennie, Chair of Personnel. Thank you for the work that you've done as we move into a new year on council. And Mr. Chairman, I want to commend you in particular for your business meeting tonight and your leadership with all of us on council, particularly the new members that have joined us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other council persons who are desiring to comment? I'll entertain a motion for that.
So moved.
So moved.
You guys look great.